Somewhere in the second year, the car starts talking to you, not the screen, the trim. A creak from the A-pillar over a patched road surface, a groan from somewhere behind the dashboard on a cold morning, a rattle from the hatch that appears at exactly one speed and vanishes at every other. One owner described his cabin turning into a haunted house on anything but perfect tarmac, and said it made a $63,000 car feel much cheaper than it was. That's the 2-year story in one sound. The mechanical parts are almost certainly fine. It's everything bolted to them that starts making itself known. How I work, in a sentence, because it's the whole basis of this. I've never driven one of these. I read. Ownership threads that run for years, service invoices people photograph, reliability surveys, regulator filings, and the long, honest posts people write the week they hand the keys over. If the evidence is thin, I'll tell you it's thin. And if I don't know, I'll say I don't know. This is where things stand at the end of July 2026. One thing to get straight before anything else. A Model Y long range with 2 years on it is a 2024 car, which means it's the old one, not the Juniper. That matters more than it sounds because the single biggest complaint about this generation is the thing the refresh was aimed squarely at. So let's start there. The ride. Reviewers and owners alike describe the pre-refresh Model Y suspension as firm to the point of harsh, and it's not a subtle thing. Every expansion joint and patched pothole comes through. At 2 years, that stops being a comfort question and becomes a durability one because a stiff car finds every week fixing in its own interior. It's why the creaks arrive on schedule, and it's the one complaint I saw repeated in every market I looked at. There's a harder version of that too. European inspection data has flagged premature wear in suspension and brake components on some nearly new Model Ys. And in the owner surveys, you'll find people describing a marked deterioration in ride quality, complaining repeatedly, and eventually having struts and bushings replaced. Reuters ran an investigation into Tesla suspension and steering complaints based on interviews with more than 20 customers and 9 staff, plus internal documents, and found thousands of owners had raised issues over a 6-year period. One former owner told them part of his suspension failed with 115 miles on the odometer, and he was quoted $14,000. I want to be careful with that because it's an extreme case, and it's a reported one. It isn't the typical experience, and I'm not presenting it as one. What I'd take from it is narrower and more useful. At 2 years, suspension noises on this car deserve an appointment rather than the radio turned up. Now the good, and it's genuinely substantial. The powertrain is the least of anyone's worries. Owners report a few % of battery degradation over the first couple of years as the norm. Home charging is the thing people rhapsodize about. One owner in Phoenix worked out that 2.5 years of running the car had added about $40 in total to his electricity bill, not per month. In total, mobile service gets consistent praise too. The same owner had a cracked driver's window quoted through the app at $350 and fixed on his driveway, against $340 for the glass alone on his other car. And the infotainment. Even people who fell out of love with the car say it's the best system they've used. Right. Conditions, because 2 years is where these separate the happy owners from the frustrated ones. Deep cold first. Owners continue to report 20 to 30% less real-world range than the sticker in cold climates, worst on short trips without preconditioning. Nothing about the second winter changes that, but the second winter is when people stop being surprised by it and start planning around it. And the tires. Model Y owners commonly get somewhere in the region of 25,000 miles from an original set. Less on the rear axle, less again if you enjoy the acceleration. On a long range, you can rotate front to rear, which is the single biggest cost advantage this trim has over the performance, and almost nobody mentions it when they're choosing. Extreme heat is where I found the most surprising owner reports. In Phoenix, at 115 to 120 Fahrenheit, one owner's home charger repeatedly cut its power output in half through the summer. He went through 2 or 3 chargers before giving up. And in the reliability survey, comments there's a Minnesota owner of a long range describing power steering cutting out in hot weather on the driveway and once on the motorway, resolved eventually by a full steering column replacement roughly 2 years into ownership. One report is not a pattern, and I'm flagging it as exactly that. But heat is the condition people plan for least, and it shows up in the data more than you'd guess. City and family life. The boot is enormous, and the frunk is genuinely useful. Two irritations recur. First, the rear speakers are mounted in the hatch, so load the boot to the roof for a holiday and the sound quality collapses. A small thing that a family notices every summer. Second, this generation runs Tesla Vision with no ultrasonic parking sensors, so close quarters parking is camera only. And one owner reported trapped moisture fogging his cameras after rainstorms, with a replacement camera that wasn't properly sealed either. Long motorway runs. This is where the driver assistance question sits. Owners describe autopilot as excellent the overwhelming majority of the time, and then describe the exceptions vividly. Sudden slowdowns for no visible reason. And on bright days, road mirages being read as obstacles and triggering hard braking. One long-term owner said he ended up driving with his foot hovering over the accelerator. Charging on a long run is fast, but the curve tapers earlier than some new arrivals, so the second and third stops feel slower than the first. And destination charging is its own quiet stress. One owner described arriving at a holiday rental with 20% and having to go and babysit the car at a supercharger before he could relax with his family. And real-world range. Rated figures for this generation sit around 300 miles. Owners consistently report landing well under, one describing a 15 to 20% gap, even driving gently in mild weather. That gap is normal across every EV on sale. It's still the thing that produces the most disappointment in year one and the most eye-rolling by year two. Build quality plainly. Misaligned panels, inconsistent paint at the edges, and squeaks from the hatch area show up often in owner reports on this generation. One owner listed uneven gaps and a door edge with a sharp point where the metal had been folded. Another described the 10-day window Tesla gives you to report delivery issues and was not impressed by it. Balance that against the owner who took a 50-item checklist to delivery, found two things wrong, had both fixed in a half-hour appointment, and said he'd buy another tomorrow. Both of those are real people describing the same model. That variance is the story. There were also scattered reports through 2024 of computer and control module failures on new cars, enough that owners were comparing notes and wondering aloud about a bad batch of boards. I couldn't establish how widespread that was, so I'm flagging it rather than claiming it. The official record briefly. Model Y campaigns across recent years have covered seatbelt reminder software, hood latch detection, and rear view camera behavior, most delivered over the air at no cost. Separately, and this is the live one, U.S. regulators opened a preliminary investigation in September into around 174,000 2021 Model Ys after reports of electronic door handles going inoperative when the 12-volt voltage dropped, most often with parents unable to get back into their children. Tesla's chief designer has said the handles are being redesigned, and last week, the regulator moved that question into industry-wide rulemaking rather than a defect finding. Older cars, no defect determined, but learn where your manual releases are, front and rear, and show whoever sits in the back. Warranty position matters at exactly this point. The basic vehicle warranty runs 4 years or 50,000 miles in the U.S., 4 years or 80,000 kilometers in several other markets, with battery and drive unit covered 8 years. At 2 years, you are still inside cover on the things most likely to bother you. Bushings, struts, trim, cameras, control modules. That window is an asset. Use it. The single most expensive mistake at this mileage is deciding a noise is just how the car sounds and getting it looked at 18 months later. Money, and at 2 years, this is the number that actually decides how people feel. The clearest account I found came from that Phoenix owner. He bought at a little over $63,000 out the door, took $11,500 in rebates, and traded in at $26,700 after 2.5 years and 43,000 miles. He called it 2/3. Another member of the forum did the arithmetic properly and pointed out it was closer to 48% against the net price. Still steep, and worth noting that Tesla offered him $23,000 while Carvana offered $28,000. Get more than one quote. That $5,000 spread was for the same car on the same day. Two honest caveats on that story, because this is a long-range video and he had a performance. Higher trims generally depreciate harder, and his worst running cost, replacing staggered rear tires every 18 to 24,000 miles at $440 each, doesn't apply to you at all. Several people in his own thread said as much. The long range would have been the cheaper, calmer car to own, which makes him a genuinely useful ex-owner because what he liked and what he hated separate cleanly. He loved the torque, the home charging, the software, the service. He replaced it with a Toyota Grand Highlander, chosen explicitly for resale value, and the thing he said he'd miss most was never going to a petrol station, so work out which half of that you are. If a car losing half its value in 30 months would ruin the experience for you regardless of how good it is to live with, this was never going to work. If you're keeping it 8 years, that number is mostly noise. Where that leaves a 2-year long range. Mechanically sound, cheap to run to a degree that still surprises people. Harsher over bad roads than it should be. Noisier inside than it was on day one. And carrying a depreciation curve you should look up before you look at anything else. Now tell me yours. If you're at the 2-year mark, what's your climate and what's your one complaint? The specific one. If you've had creaks or suspension noise, did service find something or tell you it was normal? And I want your real range figure against the rated one because I don't think anyone publishes that honestly. We went through the new Juniper at 6 months recently, and the suspension comparison is the whole story. Next week, what a set of tires actually costs across 4 countries. Since that's the running cost, nobody budgets. That's the picture as it stands. Whatever you land on, buy it with your eyes open. See you in the next one.